Innovation. It's what moves FedEx forward. The FedEx Ground Automated Hub Network provides you with the fast and efficient shipping network you need for your residential deliveries. And we're constantly investing in new technologies to process more packages and deliver orders faster. Everything from cheesecakes to tires, so you can meet the evolving demands of e-commerce. The recent enhancements to the FedEx Ground Hub allow us to deliver FedEx home delivery packages on Saturday and Sunday to many residential locations. Now, online orders can be delivered up to 2 days sooner, at no additional cost to your business. Plus, if your shipment arrives on Saturday or Sunday, when customers are more likely to be home, you can avoid missed deliveries and porch piracy. We even make it easy for your customers to schedule appointment times and evening deliveries, so they can choose when they want their packages to arrive. And innovation at the FedEx Ground Hub makes it all possible. From the smallest packages to the largest shipments, FedEx Ground helps you deliver.
Sketchy situation, a very tense situation that has developed here in the middle of downtown LA. Yeah. Yeah, those are rubber, basically rubber bullets. They're about 35 millimeters, and they can definitely hurt. They will not kill you, but they will hurt you, and you don't want to get hit with them. And the sight of them usually is enough of a deterrent to get groups like this to begin to disperse. Unfortunately, there is a mob forming around these law enforcement officers. It happened over in Pershing Square, and now it's happening over here on the 110 freeway. And you can see the worrisome part here is that, for example, the group of officers in this shot right here, just a moment ago, you saw were surrounded. They were surrounded by protesters, and they were clearly outnumbered. It's a scary situation, no matter how you slice it, even in the best of times. This protest has been peaceful. It started off peaceful, but it has devolved into something less than peaceful. Yes, absolutely. I mean, you know, there's there's various things going on here. First of all, there's a bulk of them that appear to be on the exit ramp now. So whether they're deciding, some of them, to just get off the freeway and obey law enforcement, that seems to be the case. But you can see law enforcement moving with them to prevent them from getting any further north on the 110 freeway. On the other hand, there are separate groups of individuals, in this case somebody with a spray paint can, other vandals who are intent on causing more trouble and causing more damage and vandalizing public property. It's something that we've seen for the duration of this protest. It's not a unified group. There are troublemakers and there are folks who just want to exercise their First Amendment rights, and there's a combination of the two. And there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And the goal for law enforcement is to keep traffic flowing. Even in the streets of downtown LA off of the freeway, the ideal situation, the legal way to protest, is on the public sidewalk. Once they get in the street, it's a different situation. But LAPD's been very patient all day. CHP does not have patience when it comes to blocking freeway traffic in the city of Los Angeles. It is something that is avoided at all costs for a variety of reasons. And it will eventually come to situations just like this. You've got a group that is clearly agitated. You have CHP and LAPD, which have formed a skirmish line, in this case, right on the freeway, and they are going to be forced to take action at some point here. They will use restraint. They will be patient. We've seen that restraint. We've seen that patience in the last couple of days. But at a certain point, a watch commander or a supervisor will give the go-ahead to declare this an unlawful assembly, which by now this clearly is an unlawful assembly, and they will have just a matter of minutes to either get off of the freeway and disperse, or they will begin taking people into custody. This is partially on the freeway. The lanes, I believe, on the right, if I'm not mistaken, there's a building in my way. I believe that is the that's the northbound side of the freeway. So there's the northbound side of the freeway, and then that other ramp there is actually a separate entrance ramp to the freeway. Some of them get off at that exit ramp near the top right-hand portion of your screen there, and you can see them now near that overpass. So they're flooding the embankment. They're climbing up the steps. They're now, I think that's going to be 9th Street, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's going to be, actually, that's 4th Street. I want to say that's 4th Street and the 110 freeway. On the right side is the overpass. And that's another thing that they want to prevent too. They want to prevent these folks from getting onto the overpass, where they again will pose a threat to the traffic down below. But you can see there's still plenty of people all over the place here. Really chaotic down there. The main lanes of the northbound side flooded with protesters. The southbound side has just been shut down by the CHP altogether for everybody's safety. And now you have a group forming right above them, which is a terrible thing, on 4th Street. They're basically sitting back to a degree, but the problem is they're clearly outnumbered here. So it's going to require an immediate mobilization of all of those other strike teams that have been scattered throughout downtown for the last couple of hours. They're basically in a position where they are dispatching everybody over to this part of town. So you have units that are still arriving as we speak right now that are assisting these law enforcement officers, and once they can have the power in numbers, they will begin to force this group off of the freeway. They will use non-lethal force if they are put in that position. It does look like a good bulk of the protesters are thinking better of this and climbing up that embankment up to 4th Street. It still puts them on the overpass there. Not a good position. You see a number of motor officers there. You don't like to see them surrounded. All 4 sides. I mean, they got protesters in front of them, behind them, and what can they do? You know, I mean, we saw the situation just a couple of days ago. A CHP patrol car put in that same exact position, skateboards flying through the windshield. He had to step on the gas and flee for his own safety. That could happen here. We just don't want to see that. That's right, and we've already seen points in this protest before they got on the freeway that were certainly bordering on violence. I mean, we've already seen in the last hour these protesters, some of the same people that you see in this shot here, throwing garbage at police officers, throwing projectiles at them. And now, obviously, these police officers are all, wearing bulletproof vests. They're wearing their riot gear, their riot helmets, and they are protected to a degree. But this group has certainly proven to be very aggressive. Let's just go around the LA Care building. Let's just get on the other side of it. Yeah, the shooting from the south, I think, is the best situation here. We've got about an hour and a half. About an hour and a half. What do you think? About 9? About 9 o'clock. Okay, perfect. Yeah, figure about 9 o'clock. Hey there, go ahead. You broke up. Say again. Okay. Did you hear what she said? Seventh Street and the 110 freeway. Yeah, Colleen, after a dramatic takeover of the 110 freeway, a bulk of that group, most of them, have now made their way up an embankment to an overpass. That's going to be the 7th Street, I believe the 7th Street overpass above the 110 freeway. You can see law enforcement on the scene down there, a skirmish line on one side, a group of motor officers on the other side, and a whole separate contingent of arrest teams getting into place. And those are the guys that are going to begin making the arrests if this group does not move along. That's what we're about to see here. And the problem is they are now approaching the edge of the off-ramp, which is obviously a dangerous situation for their own safety, but they are also posing a threat potentially to the drivers and motorists who are right below them, basically stuck in this mess. At this point, traffic has come to a complete halt. Both the northbound side and the southbound side of the 110 freeway completely shut down in downtown LA after protesters took over the freeway. There are still some stragglers, but most of them are now on this overpass here. The good news is, where a moment ago we saw law enforcement surrounded by protesters, there are more protesters as the minutes go by that are going to be surrounded by law enforcement, which is a much safer situation, in the event that things go sideways here.
There's a lot of officers on the freeway right now. So real quickly before we take another break, Chris, these folks were stuck in the traffic. They have not moved, right, since this group got onto the freeway?
They have not moved. This is actually not the original group of cars that were stopped by protesters. This is a separate group of cars that you're looking at here that have basically come to a stop under the overpass. There's a whole separate traffic backup about a quarter of a mile behind them that's actually come to a stop. CHP keeping them further back. That's the group there. These guys are right next to LA Live, and they basically, you can see some people actually turning around, getting off of the 110 freeway by using the on-ramps. So a little bit of a traffic jam. Traffic not incredibly hectic this Friday afternoon. We've obviously been experiencing very lower than normal traffic in downtown LA recently, and so that's basically a good thing. In the meantime, you can see that's 7th Street right there. Actually, that's 8th Street.
Wow.
That's 8th Street, and that is now a separate confrontation on the other side of the freeway where officers are basically drawing a line. They're forming multiple skirmish lines to contain and box in the crowd. That's essentially where we are. We're basically at the point where they're going to try and box them in, and I would imagine that we're just minutes away from seeing some arrests here if these folks don't disperse. I just don't see them obeying any of these orders, though.
Yeah, so we have this big crowd right there on 8th Street. We have another crowd on the 110 freeway, and the freeway is still at a standstill. Chris, stand by. We're going to take a quick break. We're also going to get the very latest in the weather as we head into this weekend with Daniel Romero, so stay with us.
Yeah, yeah. Copy, we're ready. That is Okay. You got it. Oh, yeah. That. Okay, cool. Sounds good. Ooh, what's that ramp? Where does that take them? Some of them are yeah. Back on the freeway? Well, that's true. Let's get a little bit, what's that, north? Let's get a little, yeah, let's get a little north. Stand by. What are they trying to do here? I don't know where that takes. Oh, they're just trying to get away from the police. Oh, does that ramp take them? Where does that go? Is that, they're just in the. Hold that wide shot so you can see the perimeter. Yeah, I like that. Just watch that building. Yeah, that's the shot. Just a little, yeah. No, we'll start establishing, and then we'll push into the group. Colleen, so essentially what's happened here is they formed like a little bit of a mini perimeter on this overpass at 7th Street and the 110 freeway. Officers on one side and the other side boxing in most of those protesters. So what did they do? They jumped over the rails, and they've all run into the Target parking structure near the top of your screen. That's the Target shopping center at Fig and 7th. Now hundreds of protesters running through that parking structure. Can only imagine where they come out. Of course, we'll continue to stay on top of it. Reporting live from Air 7 HD, I'm Chris Christie, ABC 7 Eyewitness News. Yeah, so there's two separate overpasses, as you can tell right here. That's the 7th Street overpass. The 8th Street overpass seems to be few more pedestrians than protesters, but nonetheless, folks are gathering and they are watching what's going on here. Some very peaceful protesters, some just regular pedestrians walking through downtown, and other troublemakers who are spray painting public property and trying to cause trouble any way they can.
All right, Chris. But of course, we're going to stay watching this. Our newscast here on KDOC TV is coming to a close, but we are going to continue our coverage on ABC7.com and our ABC7 LA apps and wherever you are streaming. But again, we're watching this, and you can see a lot of activity in downtown LA tonight. Keep
it in mind, we'll be back on Eyewitness News at 11 o'clock tonight. A lot of other rioting and protests going on throughout the country, so we hope you join us. All right, thanks for joining us. We're on the web, abc7.com, ABC7 LA streaming. So we want to continue to give you the very latest on what's going on in downtown Los Angeles. And there you see live pictures from Air 7 HD, a huge police presence going on in a number of areas in downtown LA as this crowd has been on the move, morphing and moving as they go and even splitting up. So a couple of problem areas out there. We want to go to Chris Christie right now, who's been watching it all. Chris?
Yeah, there's several groups of that initial group of, let's say, over 100 to 200 protesters that have kind of branched off into different directions. This is a separate location here over on 8th Place near the 110 freeway. Again, officers standing by, a much more manageable group, but again, trying to prevent them from getting any closer to the freeway. Earlier, we'll go ahead and pan over to 7th Street, where we just saw hundreds of protesters rush the Target parking structure right there along the right side of your screen. That parking structure right there was the only outlet for hundreds of protesters to basically get away from what is basically a perimeter. LAPD forming a perimeter on that overpass, and if they weren't able to evade police there, they would have ended up getting arrested. So I think they basically tried to just get away from police any way they could and ended up in that parking structure. You can see some of them coming out on the other side of the parking structure on, I believe, 8th Street. Here's a separate arrest team that was originally on the freeway. Again, there were a number of stragglers who remained on the freeway in an attempt to shut down traffic. This is exactly what law enforcement was trying to prevent all day long. They were giving this group as much leeway as possible. They were on a very long leash until things just went over the line. And now you see LAPD trying to maintain order in the area around the 110 freeway. The same scene, as you guys know, playing out in a number of other cities across the country. Even reports now of the Bay Bridge in San Francisco being blockaded by protesters. The protesters know that if they want to get their message across, their intention is to disrupt. They want to get as much attention as possible and disrupt high-profile landmarks or freeways or other thoroughfares. And that's what we've seen here, as we've seen in other parts of the country. And hopefully this particular protest will end without anybody getting hurt. We know one person was taken into custody a little bit earlier, a few blocks over towards Pershing Square, after things became very tense and took an ugly turn where protesters were throwing projectiles at police officers. Police officers basically calling for backup, and tons of LAPD units flooding the downtown area as best they can.
Wow, it is pretty unbelievable though to see how big this crowd has formed within sort of such a short period of time. I think at 5 o'clock there was less than 100 people that you were tracking, and now it's just ballooned.
But the good thing is, Chris, though, we haven't yet seen the violence today that we've seen in places like San Jose. We saw a lot of fists being thrown, tear gas being fired, a bunch of arrests taking place, and that continues to escalate in the Bay Area. But when it comes to Los Angeles, it was relatively mellow until just after 7 o'clock when this crowd found their way basically onto the freeway.
It's a really fair point. You know, when you look across the country, the pictures that we have seen in the last 24 hours have clearly turned to violence that neutralizes the message, it neutralizes their cause, and it just is bad news all around. Here in LA, it really has been mostly peaceful. We've had isolated incidents of violence and public disobedience, but for the most part, we have to say that this has been fairly peaceful for the most part. There are, there was an officer who was thought to have gotten hurt a little bit earlier. I don't have a status on that officer if he was injured at all. I know there were ambulances that were called over to Pershing Square, but overall, the group just appears to be desperate for attention at this point. It's up to the viewer what you want to call them, whether you want to call them protesters or demonstrators or rioters or whatever the case may be. But in this case, we really haven't seen anywhere near the level of violence that we've seen in other cities.
At At this point, we want to split the screen and show you a little bit of what's going on in Minneapolis right now. It's a close shot of the crowd, a person with a megaphone, but you can see people are en masse meeting again in Minneapolis, and it bears repeating. There is a curfew going on in that city from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m., and it is well past that. It is a little after 10 o'clock at night in Minneapolis. We did see a building on fire about an hour ago in Minneapolis, and keep in mind what happened there last night. It was the 3rd Precinct Police Station was basically burned down. The National Guard has been called and put into place there in Minneapolis as they anticipate more unrest from a crowd. We're going to continue to watch that situation. A number of other cities as well, Atlanta, San Jose, Las Vegas. We've been watching some unrest there, but in Los Angeles, our biggest concern right now is this crowd. They seem to be pretty much bent on getting the attention of law enforcement and putting their voice out there. Law enforcement largely, Chris, has been very patient with their movements.
Very patient. LAPD much more prepared today than earlier in the week, and really doing their best to not only give them the opportunity to protest, but part of the tactic is just basically staying nearby but out of sight. LAPD would rather be a fly on the wall and let the group move around with some liberties. You know, we have the luxury, I guess you would say, in the sense that downtown is still, relatively speaking, very, very quiet. I wouldn't call it a ghost town the way it's been in the last several weeks. You know, there's a lot more people walking around downtown. The stay-at-home order being lifted and restaurants opening up. You've got business owners in downtown, restaurant owners and staff preparing their businesses, preparing to reopen for the weekend. So there's a lot more activity going on downtown, but traffic-wise, they've been able to give this group lots of leeway and let them occupy some of the streets, sit down in the middle of some of the intersections at the inconvenience of other motorists, but all for the purpose of letting them express their frustrations, their anger, and their demand for justice for George Floyd. That's what this is all about. These folks are grieving, they are angry, they are taking this very personal. This is an incident that happened halfway across the country, but you would almost think that it happened in every major city. It's the same reaction to varying degrees in every major city across the country. It is a moment that we will remember years from now when we look back at this.
That crowd on the move again, very similar to their personality about an hour and a half ago, just meandering the streets looking for something. Let's give you another side. San Jose right now, which there has been a tremendous amount of violence. This shot on the right-hand side, it's near Santa Clara Street in San Jose. This was a scene just about 2 hours ago where tear gas was being administered. Very aggressive handling of the crowd. A number of arrests, a number of fights going on. Also a couple of dumpsters that were set on fire, but eventually they got the crowd to settle down. Nevertheless, there was a lot of violence there. Also, a lot of folks getting on the 101 freeway from that area. So the freeway, a constant theme, at least here in California, when it comes to these protesters. Now, on the left-hand side, that is back in downtown Los Angeles. The crowd on the move. Does it appear, Chris, on where they might be going?
Yeah, they've appeared to have turned around. So LAPD forming a pretty strong skirmish line near the 110 freeway at Olympic. That's what we're looking at here. This is Olympic Boulevard. Now here's a motorist trying to get through the intersection, and see, you don't want to see that. See protesters slamming the vehicle, and look at this. This is a motorist just trying to drive through the crowd. If he feels desperate, this is the threat. This is the problem. You try and keep the protesters separate from the motorists who are driving through the streets. And without law enforcement in the vicinity here, you have a motorist who is just trying to get through the intersection. He's now surrounded by protesters. This is going to be the intersection of Olympic Boulevard and Flower Street as he prepares to make his way through here and hopefully moves along. So the group turned around from the 110 freeway. They're going the opposite direction, traveling eastbound on Olympic Boulevard. I can tell you that the situation on the 110 freeway is resolving itself. CHP still on the scene near 7th Street, but the southbound lanes of the 110 freeway have been reopened, and the northbound side of the 110 freeway is now beginning to open up as well. So the situation on the 110 freeway is resolving. Traffic is starting to flow again. There's not a whole lot of backup, only about a half mile in either direction at 7th Street. And now the main body of protesters here traveling in the opposite direction away from the freeway, eastbound on Olympic past Flower.
Wow. Well, you can let's again hope that this continues to stay peaceful. And as we sort of watch this crowd, it does seem they're obviously going to merge together, but it does look like they are doing it in a peaceful fashion. And you see it, I mean, everybody is out there, but it does seem like there's not a huge amount of tension as we saw about an hour ago when we saw things escalating a bit.
It's interesting, you know, over the years covering these types of protests, they often start off very peacefully, and most of them end up very peacefully. But the ones that don't, the ones that kind of start to get a little bit out of control and start to pose a threat to the public are the ones that, well, you know, just to describe this one for you, to describe this demonstration during the 4 o'clock hour, it was a varying group, all ages, all races, all different people protesting the same, for the same movement. As the evening goes on, and the sun sets and it begins to get darker, the crowd skews younger, and you have a more aggressive human instinct almost that comes out of some of the folks who are here to cause trouble. And that's not everybody. Some of them are very peaceful. Most of them are here to just get their point across. But there are vandals, there are others in there who are intent on causing disruption and destroying public property.
All right, Chris, we have a dramatic scene to show you right now. This is in Minneapolis, where a number of cars has been set on fire in a desperate attempt, and a feeble one at that, of a man with a water hose trying to prevent the fire from spreading to the building. This is just a short distance away from where there are some protesters, but that's a live picture of more fires being set in Minneapolis. So the violence continues and the destruction continues in that city, a very tense city where basically is the ground zero of this entire tragedy that has basically grabbed this entire nation. And the unrest there is unprecedented levels for what that city has seen in the past. There's a better shot. You see multiple cars on fire. Again, live pictures from Minneapolis, Minnesota. So when you see stuff like that and then you turn your attention back to downtown Los Angeles, yes, we are lucky so far that this crowd, they have been walking through the streets, but so far not a whole lot of destruction, some inconveniences, of course, some big ones at that, especially when the 110 freeway has been shut down. But so far, nothing like fires being set and no tear gas, Colleen, like we saw in San Jose either, and not a whole lot of arrests either. We saw one person being detained so far, but that's it. Yeah, and we saw, you know, earlier we saw that there was protests going on in Houston, and we saw the mounted police coming out, and you saw just the intimidating factor that these horses have on protesters when they started sort of looking like they were getting a little somewhat of a tense stance against law enforcement. The horses kind of came and were a barricade again to buffer between police and the protesters. And we've been seeing this all across the country. We saw it earlier in Atlanta as well. So we know a lot of people are coming out, voicing their reaction to that really very disturbing video that did come out of Minneapolis. It came out on Monday. A different camera now, Colleen, on that same scene that we're seeing. On the right-hand side from Minneapolis, cars on fire. We saw this massive, you know, we know that the police precinct was burnt last night. We know the night before, David, we were watching this massive fire. What was it at the auto body store? Yes. So Auto Shop, AutoZone. So we've been seeing, the Target was and a number of other stores were looted. And that was some dynamic, dramatic video that spread out on social media as well. These crowds in Minneapolis overtaking these stores and looting them, and of course the AutoZone they set on fire, and then the next night they set the precinct on fire. And then of course now tonight they have the curfews, but of course people are breaking those curfews, and
again, we were hearing, you can see on
this,
the right side, it's
let's
still Minneapolis.
it's looting going on right now. Is that a live picture? Live pictures of more looting happening in Minneapolis. It looks like they're going into a store.
I'm not sure if I see people taking out stuff.
I did.
Oh, okay. So Minneapolis is in such a really fraught situation there but again, looking on the left-hand side, you see the bicyclists and everybody in the middle of the intersection. But there is something to be said. They're wanting their message heard, but in a peaceful way, which you have to commend them, because when you look at other areas that are finding a lot of violence and tension, I feel like your message almost gets lost, and you need to. And Mayor Garcetti said it tonight during his briefing. He just said, Los Angeles, come out and get your voices heard. And there are so many stories of George Floyd, but they do need to come to an end. So everyone is trying to come out and get their message out there about the injustice that happened to Mr. Floyd on Monday evening.
But do so peacefully.
Yeah.
Chris Christie's been watching this protest underway. Chris, have you been able to hear what might be happening on the 110 freeway?
Situation on the 110 freeway has really been alleviated. Traffic is flowing on both directions. CHP doing their best to now guard those remaining on-ramps. Although, I should mention, besides the transition roads that get you onto the freeway, there are these other access points where you can climb down an embankment and enter the freeway, and that's something that they were eyeing earlier. They have basically been expressing an intent to get on a freeway all day long. The organizers of this group have been talking about it. They've been aiming for the freeways. They tried the 101 freeway. They eventually made their way onto the 110 freeway. Things became very tense on the freeway. They accomplished their goal of blocking traffic for several minutes, but things really have improved on the 110 freeway. The crowd has dwindled further, so we're talking about, again, in the neighborhood of about 100 protesters here, maybe a little more, and they're now turning onto 8th Street. So now they've turned off of Hope, down 8th, towards Grand Street, and they're slowing down a little bit. This is a group that's been out here in the sun for the better part of 4 hours now, and you would imagine some of them are getting a little bit tired, and as the night goes on, I expect that we will continue to see the crowd dwindle. Hopefully, as they make their way through downtown, LAPD will continue to monitor their movements, and hopefully everything will remain peaceful.
Yes, let's hope. So we are continuing to watch this situation. You just never know. It was so peaceful earlier today where the crowd was fairly sparse, but then it does seem to ebb and flow. And then when it really rises up, boy, they move quickly and they seem to come out of nowhere. So an organized movement by this group of protesters going through downtown Los Angeles, but I will say, as Chris pointed out, it does look like that they have slowed down just a bit. In the meantime, we continue to watch a number of situations. Gabe, is that Minneapolis?
Atlanta.
Oh, that's Atlanta.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind popping that up? Okay, there we go. That is Atlanta. So to give you some background of what we've seen in Atlanta, the crowd has been very aggressive, on the move, for some reason, which we don't really know yet, or the explanation of. There's smoke there too, so we don't know if that's from tear gas or a fire that has been lit in Atlanta. But just to give you some idea of what has happened there in the past, earlier this afternoon, CNN became a gathering point for a large crowd where they, not only to face the CNN logo in the front of the building, they also started shattering some windows there at CNN. Eventually, police took a very aggressive move. They brought in Bearcats and they moved the crowd away. The crowd eventually left the front of CNN and they moved elsewhere in the city, but nevertheless, the anger and the tension continues to exist there in Atlanta, and that's those live pictures that we showed you. Back to downtown Los Angeles as this crowd continues to move, and as you can see, huge police presence all over Los Angeles, downtown LA. This appears to be some sort of a staging area, Chris.
It's so interesting, David and Colleen. It is a staging area. A number of officers, again, making their way into the downtown area. One of the things that you can't help but notice up here, and you can only really see it from the helicopter, as far as the eye could see, in a number of different directions along various freeways, you could see blue and red twinkling lights traveling by the dozens, all coming into this area. So we have LAPD officers coming from West LA, coming from the San Fernando Valley, Hollywood Division, South LA, all converging here in downtown LA. So you have just a tremendous amount of manpower in the LAPD, within the Los Angeles Police Department, that are making here in downtown LA. So you have just a tremendous amount of manpower in the LAPD, within the Los Angeles Police Department, that are making their way to this area to manage the situation and maintain order in downtown. Hopefully, it won't be needed. Hopefully, with a few skirmish lines, they can guide the crowd in certain directions. They won't be forced to use any kind of force, hopefully, if everything remains peaceful. But LAPD is ready. They're ready for anything, and that's why I think we're lucky enough to say that things have remained peaceful, because LAPD has done such a tremendous job of maintaining order here despite some isolated incidents.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkable to see that it has maintained a level of peace, because there is such a volume of people out there right now, Chris. And of course, as many times we see, once sort of the sun goes down and night falls, we sometimes takes on a whole different dynamic with people's attitudes, and the tensions sort of build. But as of right now, everyone really has been taking a peaceful stance, in a sense. Police and protesters all down there. Of course, we do know so many police officers were just as equally disturbed as the people out there who are protesting the death of George Floyd on Monday. So again, a collective group outside there trying to stay peaceful this evening, and we can only hope it stays peaceful. Joining me now will be Mark Brown pretty soon as we stay on our ABC7.com. But Chris, wouldn't you agree? It has been staying. It's maintained a level of peacefulness out there.
There's an officer surrounded.
Chris, you're on now.
I'm sorry, Colleen. Yeah, we're moving positions here. We're at Grand Avenue and 7th Street, trying to get around this building where there's a report of an officer surrounded by protesters. Obviously, you can see another crowd forming here, and folks taking pictures of something that is unfolding on the other side of this building. It looks like there's another skirmish line. You can see right there in front of that city bus a number of officers preventing them from going any further on, I believe that's 7th Street. So that a large group now turning onto Grand Avenue to get away from police. Once they see those officers in riot gear, you notice they begin to shift directions. And then the cops see them, and you see they jump right into action just like that. You saw a whole group of LAPD uniform officers with riot gear. They've got their shields. They've got their helmets on, and now they may be preparing to box in this crowd. They may have given the order, somebody may have given the order to not allow this group to travel any further on 7th Street. Excuse me, they were on Grand. They turned onto 7th Street because there was a skirmish line on the north side, and now you see that skirmish line moving, and here's a confrontation with one of the protesters getting right in the face of law enforcement, being pushed up against somebody's vehicle, and you can see things getting a little bit more tense, much more tense here in the last couple seconds. Somebody throwing things, and this is how it starts.
Wow, this is exactly how it starts right now, Chris. This is just, you see the tensions, they're just rising out there.
Tensions rising,
you can see somebody throwing cans and bottles. This is something they were prepared for. They saw some of these protesters arming themselves with bottles full of liquid, and you saw somebody throw something right there. You see less than lethal weapons being fired. That may have been tear gas. You can clearly see canisters now being fired in the direction of protesters. So things are taking a turn here in downtown LA.
Yeah, we're watching it here in the crowd. The skirmish line reforming here, as we're seeing. And yeah, what can happen sometimes is they'll arm themselves with objects. You're seeing it here. They're throwing things at the police.
Yeah.
The officers have the right to defend themselves against items being thrown at them. they're trained, you know, to deal with unrest, with situations like this. People yelling and screaming at them, getting in their face. If someone yells and screams at you and gets in your face, you do not have the right to retaliate in any way against them. But once the threat becomes physical, and that is when you will see officers retaliate or at least take action to stop whatever perceived or actual physical threat is going on, and that's what it appears to have happened here. But the crowd moving back in response to those less than lethal rounds and the what I guess is pepper spray or pepper gas or pepper balls that are being launched at them. And now, but they're still kind of congregating right around. They're right around a police car there. I don't know if that car is occupied. Can you tell?
I can't tell. I cannot tell, but I could see that skirmish line is gradually moving. So the decision has been made to kind of, I guess you would say, close in on the group. They are basically surrounded by law enforcement. I can't see if they can go any further north on 7th, but they certainly can't go any further south on 7th Street. You can see that skirmish line there. There's another skirmish line at the intersection of Grand as they begin to scatter once again. If you tilt up just a little bit, Rob, I want to see, have they formed another one north of the intersection? Can they continue to go north? There's some patrol cars, but they don't have the north side of the intersection shut down, just the east and west side on Grand Street, or Grand Avenue, I should say. So you can see things have kind of come to a pause here as LAPD begins to close in on this group towards 7th and Grand. Lots of folks screaming. Again, looks like somebody smashed a skateboard into that back window or something. I think it was that skateboard. But the back window of that patrol car has now been completely smashed. So again, a very animated crowd, very agitated, and beginning to get ever more aggressive.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting as we've watched these protests taking place across the country. Seems like after dark, they take a turn. We've been watching them during the day, and the things would be fairly calm. There are exceptions, of course, but then as things got darker, under cover of darkness, if you will, or whatever, darkness hits and things change a little bit. That skirmish line advancing again, and what they're trying to do here is basically, I think, herd the people, for lack of a better word, move them in a direction and get them to gradually disperse. You kind of lose people dropping off as along with with distance and with time, keep advancing, keep moving, and
what are you hearing?
You get down to a core group of a few dozen people sometimes, and then they'll just disperse after that. But a lot of things can happen between now and then, as we're seeing. Look at that.
Wow, we're seeing fireworks now happening. Were those that looks like a firework.
Yeah, that was clearly a firework. I did not see exactly where that came from. You could see one officer down getting back up, but something was shot in that direction. I can tell you that I'm hearing word, and I cannot visually confirm this yet, but some of these protesters have actually made their way back over to the 110 freeway where they're trying to get on the freeway. So now we have two separate locations. We'll try and get some more information and a better view of that situation on the 110 freeway in a minute, but clearly you can see things getting much more animated at 7th and Grand, where tear gas was fired, and now we see fireworks going off. I'm not sure where that came from, but presumably that would have come from the group of protesters.
Yeah, Chris, and we were seeing earlier, you and I both saw that same image where it looked like someone holding their skateboard had just smashed the back windshield of that cruiser that we see right there with its lights flashing. But again, this crowd is getting a little bit more tense, and it doesn't help matters that most people have been on lockdown. People have been on lockdown for the last couple months, and this is the first night that County is reopening their restaurants, so people are started getting out, and I think a lot of people have a lot of pent-up energy coming out there. And boy, this is just getting the tensions are escalating. People are becoming more and more violent out here. Let's hope it stays. Brings some peacefulness to it again.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the pandemic, Colleen, and how we're still in the midst of that. We're on the downward slope of that, but we're still in it. And it is a fact that so many people have been locked up in their homes for a long time, or they haven't been able to work, or if they are working, they're working a lot more hours under conditions that they may find themselves in danger, some of these essential workers. So it has been a tense time anyway. It's been a difficult time anyway. And you overlay that with what has happened in this really difficult month. You know, it's not just, George Floyd was kind of kind of lit the fuse, but the fuse has been there, and it's been simmering over the, for years really, but especially over this month with two other very highly publicized incidents just this month, and then last month was Ahmaud Arbery as well. Yep. So it's just been a very, very difficult time and very stressful emotionally for a lot of people who are concerned about issues of justice, issues of fairness, issues of policing, and then to
issues of unemployment.
Right. Right.
And issues of fear of the other threat is coronavirus, and trying to keep themselves safe. So again, tonight LA is opening gradually. Almost everything is reopened, and people are out. And Chris, you're seeing it. I mean, you've been here. We've been watching the streets empty for weeks.
There is something heartbreaking about it. Downtown LA has been a ghost town. Let's face it. Last couple months, it's been desolate down here. People have been working from home, and we have just not seen a lot of activity. But we've been flying over it, and basically flying over it in awe of how empty it's been. We just never have seen it like this. And it kind of had this vision in my head that when things start to open up and we begin to find our new normal, that I just imagine that it would look anything like this. And I can't imagine being a business owner down there, a restaurateur who's preparing to open for the weekend for the first time in weeks and welcome Angelenos in with open arms. And to see this is just a little heartbreaking.
Normal, Chris, but with the same old problems. When you think about it.
That's right. There's a correlation. There really is. And you're right. It just took something to light the fuse, and we can't say that this is going to be the end all here. We know it's not going to be. This George Floyd incident and the others are just a catalyst for the reaction that we're seeing not only here in LA, but across the country.
Yeah, but speaking of across the, we have several other live pictures from across the country in Atlanta and in Minneapolis. I believe this pictures from across the country in Atlanta and in Minneapolis. I believe this might be in Minneapolis on the right-hand side, where we've been seeing cars lit on fire. We've been seeing people trying to put out the flames. I think they're probably trying to protect structures because the firefighters weren't there. But again, we saw some fires set tonight. We see the fires on these cars. We know there's a curfew in place. Clearly, that curfew is being broken by several people who are disturbing the environment. And then you can see Atlanta, Mark. We've been kind of going on there. Remember earlier we saw a lot of people kind of forming around 5 o'clock there.
Right, and they were gathering notably outside the CNN building in Atlanta. And there were some police cars out in front that got torched. The building itself was damaged. People ended up in the lobby of the CNN building. A police skirmish line formed inside the building, and people were throwing things at the police officers. They were landing in there. The mayor of Atlanta expressing her outrage at what has happened. Mayors all over the country. Interesting, LA's mayor was in contact with the mayor of Minneapolis and the mayor of St. Paul, expressing his concerns and hopes for their communities. And watching our own city tonight, where things are unruly. So far, no fires being set. It's nothing like Minneapolis or Atlanta, but people are angry. People are taking to the streets. Chris, where are they going now?
So this group here is making a turn to the south. They were basically pushed in this direction by LAPD. Things got a little confrontational again. Police officers using their batons at times to force these protesters down Grand Avenue. And now you can see they're meshing with motorists. I'm sorry, 8th Street and they're meshing with some of those motorists. In the meantime, we are traveling west. We're now over the 110 freeway, where we have a report of another freeway closure after protesters have managed to make their way back on the freeway. So we can see the backup here. We'll try and get into a better position to see if we can find those protesters, but officers calling for help, trying to now get back onto the freeway. We thought this was a situation that had been alleviated. It was for a short time, but now we see officers here in this shot back on the freeway, and hopefully when we get around this building, we'll see what's transpiring here. I think that's going to be the northbound side. Northbound side, yeah, northbound side of the 110 freeway on the right-hand side, southbound side coming towards you here, and it looks like something is happening behind the building. I can't see it just yet, but let's get on the other side of that LA Care building, and we'll be able to see the northbound lanes of the 110 freeway, where traffic has once again come to a stop. I can see LAPD doing a circle around the overpass, a number of people on the overpass, and it looks like, yeah, maybe just a handful, but that's all it takes. A handful of people skating on the freeway.
Yeah, that's all it takes. And you just feel for everyone who's trying to navigate themselves through this area. It's the main artery to get through. Wow, you can see on the right-hand side through downtown LA. We're talking about the 110, but on the right-hand side, I believe that was Atlanta. Oh,
That's
that
an
is an
LAPD
LA.
unit, yeah.
That's ground video that we have from Los Angeles. Wow, so they're defacing police cruisers. Wow. Well,
I do have some information, Colleen and Mark. We told you about that incident over in Pershing Square during the 7 o'clock hour, where things took a very ugly turn. A number of LAPD officers were surrounded at one point on the northwest corner of Pershing Square along Olive Street. Protesters throwing garbage at police officers. We now understand that one of those officers has been hospitalized, has been taken to the hospital. We don't know the extent of those injuries, but we now have at least one police officer injured as a result of this demonstration.
Okay, and then we're watching people on the 110 freeway stopping traffic and wandering in and out of lanes in between the cars. The skateboarder there deliberately, seemingly making it so that traffic cannot pass. So it's the second time this has happened just this evening, where the 110 freeway has been blocked in both directions. Parts of it were open for a time. It seemed like police were getting an upper hand there, but now it appears they are moving back onto the freeway in downtown LA to try to shut it down.
So it looks like traffic is moving again on the southbound side. It's mainly the northbound side where there are a few skaters and a few protesters. Looks like they are taking over. That's going to be That's going to be the entrance ramp. I think that's the entrance ramp, or is that the main lines, Rob? Is that no, that is the main line. So yeah, a group of protesters with signs. Now holding up traffic on the northbound side here. And in this shot, you don't see any law enforcement just yet. CHP in the process of now making their way closer to this group, but at the same time, they're also focused on keeping the distance between the protesters and those other motorists. You can see some of those cars trying to squeeze through there along the shoulder, but those protesters right there have formed a little bit of a blockade, blocking those right two lanes.
Right, and of course it was a couple of days ago that some protesters got onto the 101 freeway and formed a crowd much like you're seeing here, pretty much the same size even. And some CHP officers were kind of trapped behind them. Those officers tried to move through the crowd and people were objecting to that and started trashing their vehicles, smashing in the windows, smashing in the rear windows. The officers then took off or headed out of the crowd. People got on top of the vehicle, and one of the persons who was on the hood of one of the CHP vehicles fell off, appeared to hit his head, was injured, transported later. The two CHP cars were smashed, and now you're seeing they've made it all the way across, and they're actually putting up blockades. They're putting up these barriers.
I can't make out what those are. What are those?
Those are those street.
I can't quite tell.
Barriers, but I don't know what the white ones are to the side. What are those? You're right. I'm wondering what that is.
Those, I can't tell what they've moved there. I mean, for a second it looked like those construction, those
like K-rails.
I thought I saw a concrete construction barrier, but obviously that would be way too heavy, and I just can't tell. It looks like it's basically amazing. It looks like some plywood, maybe some other signage, and they're basically forming a makeshift blockade here. Hard to tell in terms of numbers because of the darkness, but we're at least 50 protesters who seem to be intent on shutting down traffic. And this is, if you want to piss off the CHP, this is how to do it. They have been on a mission for the last several days to prevent a scene like we saw on Wednesday of protesters on the freeway at all costs. They can't afford to shut down traffic on the freeway. And unfortunately, that's exactly what they've been able to do. We're going to make our way over to Hope and 7th Street now, Colleen and Mark, where we're getting reports from our assignment desk that there is another officer down. So excuse us as we kind of move through the buildings here. We'll try and maintain this shot of the 110 freeway. Hope and 7th Street is going to be about 6 blocks over to the east, Josh, and then we'll look up towards 7th where that crowd was gathered just a few minutes ago. Just bear with us, guys, as we kind of navigate through downtown LA. We should have a shot of whatever is transpiring in just a minute. But it does look like there is traffic coming to a stop here. This is going to be 7th Street at Grand, and then Hope. Look over to the right, right out my left window. I'm sorry, the left window right here. You can see some activity. Looks like things have gotten dramatically more intense here. We'll try and find any ambulances that might be on their way over here, but the report that came in was that there is an officer down. It looks like LAPD forming more skirmish lines, blocking off this entire intersection. So now we just need to find the group of protesters who are moving through here. Looks like they may have pushed them. Maybe they pushed them maybe back towards the freeway. I don't know. This is obviously the staging area that we were looking at earlier. A lot of patrol cars moving into the downtown area. As I mentioned earlier, you've got units from across the department, every corner of the city of Los Angeles. Here's an ambulance.
Okay.
Here's an ambulance.
Okay, there's the ambulance. Now we're trying to. There's the ambulance. Now we're trying to find the officer who was apparently injured in this area.
Let's get right over this street here, and we'll see if he makes the right. If he goes right, or if he continues down, or is he being escorted to the hospital already? We'll see what happens here. Looks like the ambulance is coming to a pause here at the intersection, and we'll see where he goes. Oh, he's making a left onto 7th. He's making a left onto 7th, so we'll come around this building here. Again, always tricky navigating these. Buildings, but we'll get it. We'll find it. It looks like the group is going to be right here near the intersection as that ambulance comes to a stop.
Is it a bicycle officer? Is it one of these folks on the kind of? If you look in the upper middle center part of your screen there. Trying to see what that is. That a group of officers there, or is that just some bicycles? What is that?
Clearly, there was a group of bicycle units. They've been kind of units. They've been clearly there was a group of bicycle units. They've been kind of escorting the crowd throughout the day. They've been using bicycle units to do that and kind of sway the protesters in certain directions. Okay, here it is. Okay. Looks like that's an officer. Yeah. So they are clearly escorting this officer over to the ambulance. It looks like he's holding his right hand up. You're seeing what we're seeing up here, but it does appear he may be bleeding and has been struck by something. Looks like his right hand. His right hand is bleeding pretty good there. So he will be assessed by medical personnel. Hopefully he will be okay, but clearly something transpired. Let's go back to that van that he came out of. If you tilt down, we'll see if there's any, what is that? Is that a canine unit maybe? Looks like maybe a canine unit. So something came to a head here. We just not sure what happened, but clearly you can see they've quickly moved into position, shutting down this entire intersection, and it looks like the crowd has kept on going.
Okay, so now here, 7th and Grand, did you say?
7th and Hope
7th
actually is
and
where we
Hope.
are right now. Yep.
Okay, so 7th and Hope and also Pershing Square. So that would be 2 officers now who have been injured in tonight's melee.
2 officers injured, and here an example of somebody trying to hold somebody else back from, just overdoing it. It's one thing to express your frustration with these officers, but when you go too far, that's when trouble arises. So somebody clearly very angry, screaming at these officers, and others trying to diffuse the situation here. You can see obviously these police officers exercising a tremendous amount of restraint, as they have been for the last 48 hours, and tonight is no different. They are really doing their best to be as patient as possible with all of these protesters.
Yeah.
Well, and it's really kind of a feature of protest demonstrations like this, where they start out peacefully, but there's always a few that seem to either want to agitate or get carried away and end up damaging or hurting people. And you see the other demonstrators frequently. We've seen a number of cases like this just in the last few days of the people who either called the demonstration or who are part of it and want no part of any sort of violence or property damage.
Yes, we've got to get going. Sorry about that.
Trying to restrain people who are intent on causing trouble. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they aren't. And it, whatever the city, we've seen it in all different cities. These demonstrations are happening literally all over the country, in Iowa, in Atlanta, in Minneapolis, obviously, Lexington, was it Lexington, Kentucky? No, Louisville, excuse me. Louisville, Kentucky, which is of course where one young woman was killed by police in her own apartment. These demonstrations are happening everywhere, and you're seeing people of goodwill who want to show their displeasure and their outrage at what has happened, along with people who are not necessarily of goodwill, who are fomenting trouble within the situation.
Yeah.
Air 7 having to leave the area now to get fuel.
Yeah, we've been looking at other live pictures from, you can
This
see
is
Minneapolis. You can see a large crowd gathering in Minneapolis right there. And again, we do know there's a curfew in place, and we do know the National Guard was called out to this area because they've been having so much unrest there the last few evenings.
Everybody's just kind of completely... All right, so people violating that curfew in Minneapolis, and I don't see National Guard troops in this shot or police, but that's an ongoing, very, very troubling situation. All right, we're going to discontinue at this point, and we will rejoin you a little bit later on, and as events warrant here in Los Angeles. We invite you to watch ABC 7 tonight at 11 o'clock, where we'll have a complete wrap-up as well as live coverage of the events that are unfolding across the country and here in Southern California.